Good evening and welcome to a very special program. Over the last several days, I've been here in Switzerland trying to gauge what's going to happen as a result of the talks or in the talks between Iran and the United States. There has been a breakthrough. In fact, it was at this time yesterday that there was a sense that there wouldn't be one. When I was at the Bergenstock Resort, a short distance away from me, in fact, just in the hills to my left, there was a sense at this time that the Iranians might in fact go away without agreeing to anything. But overnight, they worked very hard. There's been considerable progress that has taken place. So what we'll be doing on this is to go through some of the key points which have actually been arrived at. I'll come to those points in just a few moments from now, but also bring in some of the best guests around the world on this. But before I do that, let me just go through some of the key points to give you a sense of what Iran and the United States have agreed upon. Remember, they already have a memorandum of understanding. Within a period of approximately 60 days, they need to operationalize various parts of this agreement to ensure that there is a lasting peace. That's what we're looking at. So in terms of what I call the Bergenstock breakthrough, number one, there will be nuclear verification of Iran's nuclear facilities and its uranium or relatively enriched uranium reserves. The IAEA inspectors have been granted immediate access or a return. The International Atomic Energy Agency. Nuclear facilities will be tracked permanently. There'll be permanent denuclearization and a pathway which is officially mapped. In terms of maritime security, the Strait of Hormuz will be kept open. There'll be joint Gulf shipping patrols which have been established. That's been a matter of grave concern. But the idea is to ensure that shipping goes on properly and unhindered, and by which I mean obviously oil and gas shipping. Commercial energy trade routes will be secured. Now here's the key part. There's been regional deconfliction. Now what exactly does this mean? In the context of what we've seen, the fighting between Hezbollah and Israel, this is important. So Israel and Lebanon hotlines have been successfully connected. This is what they're talking to as a deconfliction process. High-level conflict prevention panel has been created. Direct military communication lines have been opened. So this presumably would ensure that there is no fighting between both sides, there is no tension, and if there is, then it can be resolved, because if it's not resolved, Iran is absolutely clear. They walk. None of the rest of the deal works if fighting between Hezbollah and Israel continues. So there is a diplomatic transition period which is taking place. As I mentioned, there's a 60-day ultimate treaty timeline set. Qatar, Pakistan are the permanent mediation players over here. Their role has been codified, and a bilateral implementation review board has been launched as well. So those are some of the key details. Let's just listen in to some of the key statements. This is the Iranian Foreign Minister, Mr. Arakchi. We'll also listen in on what the US Vice President J.D. Vance had to say.
One room, two rivals, just a few feet apart, but not a single greeting. US Vice President J.D. Vance and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arakchi stood inside the same hall during the high-stakes Switzerland talks. There was no handshake, no conversation, not even eye contact. Then came another dramatic moment. Shortly after US President Donald Trump issued fresh warnings to Tehran, the Iranian delegation briefly walked out. Visuals showed Arakchi exchanging a few words with Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif before turning around and leaving the hall alongside the Iranian delegation. The images immediately fueled speculation over rising tensions.
فکر می‌کنم تقریباً 1.5 ساعت بحث شد و قرار بر این شد که ما یک وقفه کوتاه نیم ساعته داشته باشیم و بعد ادامه بدیم. تو همون زمان هم بود که اظهار نظرهای موهن و تهدیدآمیز رئیس جمهور آمریکا در رسانه‌ها منتشر شد.
According to Iranian media, this symbolism had been planned. Tehran reportedly rejected repeated requests for a ceremonial handshake. It also refused a joint photograph with the American delegation. describing the proposed media event as a US media show. For Iran, the message appeared clear. It would negotiate on its own terms. But despite the prevailing tensions, the negotiations did not collapse. Vice President J.D. Vance acknowledged Iran's frosty optics, but dismissed claims that Iran had abandoned the process.
I think with the Iranians, yes, they did threaten to walk out, or at least there were social media threats that they would walk out. But we were negotiating well past 1 a.m. yesterday, so they didn't walk out. And their technical team is still here in Bergenstock working with our technical team. What we told the Iranians yesterday is when you guys engage in what us millennials might call trash talk, you can't expect the President of the United States not to respond and not to correct the record.
Diplomacy is negotiated behind closed doors, but it is often judged through the images that emerge outside them. Whether by design or diplomacy, Abbas Araghchi ensured every visual from Bergen's talk reinforced one message: Iran would engage, but on its own terms. Bureau Report, NDTV World.
All right, so will there be real peace at the end of the day? Joining us, Colonel Jeffrey Fisher. I'm also joined by Syed Imamian, an assistant professor in public policy at Tehran. I'm joined by Mohammad John Hussain, a senior journalist in Tehran, and Ophir Diane, researcher at the INSS and former officer in the Israeli Defense Forces Spokespersons Unit. Ophir Diane, let me come to you first, because in a sense what they've managed to do is create, or they believe they've created, a deconfliction process. So in other words, there'd be hotlines which are set up between Hezbollah and Israel, between Israel and America that already exists, but potentially Iran and Israel as well, so that if ever there is, renewed fighting or the possibility of fighting or tensions between Hezbollah and Israel, it can be deconflicted. Do you believe that this mechanism will work?
First of all, I want to correct the record a bit. The meeting in Lucerne yesterday created a deconfliction mechanism that does not include Israel. The conflict is between Israel and Hezbollah and Israel and Iran, in addition to obviously the conflict between the United States and Iran. So I really don't see how a deconfliction mechanism that does not fully include Israel as an equal member has any chance of succeeding. But I also want to point out some of the things that were said in your excellent report. We're seeing here the Iranians playing for time. We're seeing the Iranians really trying to waste time in these negotiations, hoping that they will get a good result to end with. We have not seen in any way, shape, or form, Iran letting go of its ballistic missiles that have targeted Israeli civilians for the last few years, have killed Israeli civilians, and we have not seen reining in Hezbollah that continues to kill Israeli civilians and soldiers as we speak.
No, so let me come back, Ophir, with one more question. Again, on this deconfliction mechanism, are you suggesting that it's vague? Because to me, reporting from Lucerne as I am, and I was in Bergenstock yesterday, this is the big forward push, or the big sort of movement forward towards hopefully dealing with a scenario of tension between Hezbollah and Israel. Are you suggesting it's so vague that it cannot be implemented?
I really hope it will be implemented, but I really hope so that we can have a deconfliction mechanism between Israel and the Lebanese government, the Lebanese sovereign government. I really, as an Israeli, obviously, but also as a citizen of the world looking at the Lebanese government, I don't see how they can agree to Hezbollah, who is a terrorist organization, a militia inside a country, deciding that Iran can intervene in internal Lebanese affairs. I don't see how that's any reasonable solution on the side of the Lebanese government. And we have seen the Israeli ambassador and the Lebanese ambassador to Washington having discussions, and I think this will be the most useful and the most effective track between the two governments, understanding that a militia force cannot operate inside Lebanon and target foreign civilians.
No, okay. So, Colonel Fisher, I think there's some important points that Ophir brings in over here. She is less than convinced about this deconfliction mechanism, and not entirely sure who it applies to. Is it a direct link between Israel and Hezbollah? Is it a link between Washington and, let's say, the Lebanese government? What about Iran? Who exactly are they deconflicting with? Do you believe that unless there is clarity in this, the standoff between Hezbollah and Israel, which we've been seeing now for several days, even if there's no active fighting right now as we speak, that will remain a problem?
I believe she's right. I will say this as a former diplomat: when you watch two sides walk away from an agreement and both are unhappy, you usually have a little bit of optimism, because if both sides are unhappy, then neither's really getting exactly what they want, and they both are willing to walk away. I appreciate the comments that you made at the beginning of this and all of the terms that were kind of laid out. But when you talked about those terms, I almost felt as though, as a guy listening, that these were desires and not necessarily substantive efforts.
Well, they have to be negotiated, and this is what they've announced. But it's not yet a done deal. But this is where they announced progress. I mean, that's all there is to it as we speak.
Sure, 100%. Yeah. And I don't begrudge your points, because I think that you're reporting exactly what the desires are. I'm not questioning your reporting. I think it's spot on. I just think that when we look at from the desires to actually getting to reality, I'm not very optimistic that this 60-day window will not result again in some form or fashion of further conflict between the United States and Iran.
Firas Abiad, former Health Minister of Lebanon, joins us as well. Mr. Abiad, thanks very much for being with us. Deconfliction between Hezbollah, which operates on Lebanese soil, and Israel, and the mechanism which has been announced. I don't see very many details presently, but do you believe that there needs to be communication between the government of Lebanon and Iran and the United States and Israel to ensure that fighting between Hezbollah and Israel doesn't take place? Can that really happen?
Well, there are two paths clearly that we're dealing with. The first one is the path of these negotiations that are happening in Geneva. And on that aspect, there has been communication between the Lebanese government and the Americans. Vice President J.D. Vance called our president today. Also, the Premier of Qatar called him, and they are informing him about what's happening there. I also understand that Mr. Kalibaf had a conversation with our head of parliament. Concerning the Lebanese, American, Israelis, as you know, there are meetings that will be happening tomorrow in Washington, also looking at what will happen in the South. What is the most important part is that if we do not achieve a ceasefire, then Lebanon, or the situation in Lebanon, threatens not only to derail what's happening in Lebanon, but to derail the whole agreement or the whole MOU. Yep. And therefore, it is extremely important, at least to start with the ceasefire, and then move on to the other areas, such as the withdrawal of Israel from the South, and also release of prisoners. And what is important is that, concerning the disarmament of Hezbollah, or one of the important things that are being discussed, as long as the Israeli army is present in Lebanon, as long as it's attacking Lebanese towns, killing Lebanese civilians, then really you cannot talk about disarming what appears to be a resistance towards Israel at the time when the Israeli are pushing into Lebanon. Therefore, we really believe, the Lebanese government believes, that the first step has to be a ceasefire.
Okay. John Hussein, a senior journalist, joins us from Iran. John, thank you very much for being with us. Ophir, just hold on for half a second. I'm trying to sort of get voices from all around, but I will come back to you, Ophir, in just a few minutes. John Hussein, as I see it, the biggest takeaway for Iran, assuming that there is no fighting between Hezbollah and Israel, and that's a big assumption, is sanctions. Sanctions will go away. Your export of oil and gas will restart. How important is this? And do you believe that that this will happen almost immediately, as the Iranian government has claimed?
Thank you so much for having me, Vishnu. So regarding the oil sales and the waiver, I think we already see a waiver in place where Secretary Prescott has already announced that Iran is getting a 60-day waiver, which is to be applied till 21st of August 2026. And this is a big achievement indeed. But I think that the main issue right now is focusing on Lebanon, and the technical teams which are present in Switzerland, where you are right now, are currently focusing on the issue of Lebanon and amongst other things as well. But the main focus of the issues is Lebanon. So certainly there is no clarity as to whether or not Israel will abide by the ceasefire. But we see that after the closure of the Strait of Hormuz was announced by Khatam al-Anbiya yesterday, we see a lot of restraint from Israeli side, and we see that ceasefire has largely been in place as far as I know. I'm not sure whether the Lebanese gentleman here will agree with that, but we see that something has to be done with regards to the implementation of the MOU, and I think that Lebanon is the integral part of it, and this is a red line that Tehran has insisted upon. So I don't think that Iran will leave this issue aside.
Syed Imamian, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at Tehran Polytechnic. The other aspect, sir, in all of this has been that $300 billion of funds will eventually make their way to Iran. Now, what we are learning from J.D. Vance is that in terms of, so that's one part of things. Now, America says that they're not going to be part of actually funding Iran directly. That might, in fact, be done through several of the GCC nations. But in terms of the release of funds which are Iranian, J.D. Vance said that those funds will go to America, to the agriculture sector, where produce in America's agriculture sector will be purchased and then sent back to Iran, for Iranian citizens. Does that model work?
It seems that J.D. Vance is trying to convince the political base that they are calling themselves America First, because they have been accused for a long time. The Trump administration have been accused of protecting Israelis' interests rather than American interests. So they are trying to show their political base that they are genuinely looking for protecting American interests. So they have tried to connect between the lifting of, says, Iranian assets to the kind of the prosperity prospect for the American industries. But in technical way, I never heard such conditions to be part of the agreement. So Iranian assets would be released, and this is the Iranian legitimate right and sovereign right to use their asset as however they are going to use it. At the same time, there are some exchanges and some discussion has been going on that it would be a kind of the mechanism to have American companies, once the primary sanctions lifted, to be involved in the Iranian economy. And it's this kind of the interdependency or exchange of the economic interests would be much more important in securing or guaranteeing the Iran-US peace deal. So that would be a general idea that interdependency, economic interdependency, and trade exchange would be very much important, but it needs to be based on the lifting of primary sanctions, and then it would be something to be implemented.
Colonel Fisher, again, I think Mr. Imamian reflects what the expectation is, but just weeks after America bombed Iran and Israel bombed Iran, hit their infrastructure, lots of civilian deaths, the economy in a very precarious state, we are today on a program talking about how funds can get into Iran to help rebuild that country, funds organized by those nations which attacked Iran. I find this reality to be unrealistic, unbelievable. Could you share your thoughts on this, Colonel Fisher? Could you unmute yourself, Colonel Fisher?
Apologize for that. You're right. If you look at Donald Trump's current polling numbers in the United States, he's polling very poorly. And he is a president who ran on a platform and said no new wars, and has started a new war. So his base has got some serious challenges with where he's taken this. I know that he wants to try and make the end of this war kind of look like a U.S. victory, but we have a phrase in the United States. It's called putting lipstick on a pig. and it doesn't go so well, right? It's a pretty bad look. And no matter how nice you try and make a pig look, it's still going to look like a pig. The other thing is, your gentleman who spoke earlier about, having U.S. companies come in, this politically, this might play well at the senior level, but the truth of the matter is your large U.S. construction companies that come in and build, they're going to use Iranian labor. The vast majority of this money is going to go into Iranian pockets, and then it's going to go into the very wealthy pockets of the United States. It will not use U.S. construction labor bringing them in. This is not a U.S. jobs program. So once you start peeling back the onion, it doesn't look as good as it might originally sound.
Yeah. We're running short on time on this discussion, but I just wanted to go back to Opir Diyan. Opir, you had a point you wanted to make earlier on. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So the gentleman, my colleague from Lebanon, said earlier that Israel is still attacking in Lebanon. Yes, he called it resistance. No, it is not a resistance. People in northern Israel are still running to shelters as we speak. This is not resistant to any Israeli activism in Lebanon. It's targeting civilians. And I want to say one more thing, and I think that the vast majority of Israelis agree with me on this, on what I'm going to say right now. Israel has no interest in continuing this war. We would much rather that the international community empower the Lebanese government to demilitarize Hezbollah on their own. Therefore, Israel would not have to sacrifice soldiers fighting in Lebanon to demilitarize Hezbollah. But the core function of a state is to ensure the safety of its citizens, and Israel must do it. And if the Lebanese government is unable or unwilling to demilitarize Hezbollah, and Hezbollah keeps targeting Israeli civilians, Israel has no other choice but to protect them. I personally, and I think, again, the vast majority of Israelis would agree with me, would much rather prefer to see the Lebanese government take this role and assume its sovereignty over a militia operating on its soil. But unfortunately, this has not happened in the last 20-something years that we have been in this cycle with Hezbollah.
Let me take that to Firas Abiad, the former health minister of Lebanon. Mr. Abiad, does the Lebanese government have any control over Hezbollah?
Well, if you look at the facts, what's happening on the ground and not on the rhetoric, and here, if we want to talk about this rhetoric, we can speak about what Smotrich, the defense minister, talked about, the need for Israel to expand northwise and next part of the Lebanese territory. We can talk about what other ministers have spoken about settlements in South Lebanon. But if we ignore all of that and look at the facts on the ground, we see that when the 2024 agreement was in place, and that was part of the agreement done with the government where I was participating in. Between 2024 till 2026 almost, the only party that was firing into Lebanon was Israel. And despite the fact that there was not even a bullet fired from Lebanon towards Israel, during that period, the Lebanese government was actually actively disarming Hezbollah. It had disarmed the area that is south of Litani. It had announced plans to disarm the areas north of Litani River. And it also had pronounced that the military wing of Hezbollah illegal. Now, unfortunately, with the Israeli incursions, and if you look at the latest Israeli people who were killed, they were actually soldiers advancing in Lebanon. When Israel incurged into Lebanon, when Israel started bombing, including bombing Beirut, where in one day, and as the surgeon, I was in the emergency room receiving those patients, more than 350 people were killed and more than 1,000 people were injured. This is actually legitimizing what Hezbollah is doing. And therefore, what the
hold on, sir, for half a second. You made lots of points.
Let's have a ceasefire and then take it from there.
Opir, 30 seconds. I need to wrap this up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Look, I know that the last five Israelis who were killed are indeed soldiers, but they were there because there are 40 terrorists, Hezbollah terrorists, inside a tunnel, targeting Israel with drones, with missiles, and the Lebanese government is unwilling or unable to take care of this. I don't think that anyone is seriously expecting Israel to do nothing while it is being targeted by drones and by missiles. As you said, in the last few years, since the weekend, we have been seeing an improvement and a genuine ceasefire. But I really don't think that anyone is seriously considering asking Israel to not do anything in the face of people firing at Israel. And I really would advise the Lebanese government, which I was very optimistic for, to assert sovereignty over their militias in the countries and not to allow them to attack foreign citizens. I think that's a basic law in sovereignty and in public relations, in diplomatic relations.
All right. Well, look, I'd like to thank you all very much. I think the fault lines are absolutely visible on this program, and that really has been the big concern, Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah. But I do believe that the overall contours of the peace deal, which have been announced, the process, J.D. Vance meeting the Iranian speaker for 80-odd minutes, I think that's a huge step forward, considering the fact that earlier on in the day yesterday, they didn't even want to appear, the Iranians and the Americans together, for a photo opportunity. But what happened, then they really worked through the night, and it was about 4 a.m. in the morning. I'd gone off to sleep. I woke up at that stage to actually see the terms which Qatar and Pakistan, the mediators, had broadly announced. It's a pretty remarkable focus, a pretty remarkable progress. But be that as it may, we're going to have to wait and see if this actually continues.